Hi, my name is Chloe Nuttle, and this is my Statics in the Real World project from summer 2022. So, to get started, this was my setup. Essentially, I attached a force gauge on the handle of a wagon attached to a rope, in which that rope was attached to a pole that was in a hitch off of the back of my dad's Tahoe. This force gauge had a hook on one end, so I kind of strapped it to the ratchet straps that you see in blue there, so that it could give an accurate reading. So our expectation, or my expectation, was that by adjusting the height of the eyelet, the horizontal force was going to change. My assumption was that as the height went farther up, that angle was going to increase, and it would have increased the horizontal force in the rope. So we used the force gauge to measure the horizontal force from the wagon to the eyelet, and by keeping the speed of the vehicle, the length of the rope, and the weight of the wagon constant, we were able to mitigate a lot of outside forces. And then lastly, we found the flattest ground so that the elevation of the ground doesn't affect the results. So our experimental values did play into what our hypothesis was, in that it did increase as the height of the eyelet increased. Our rope was 156 inches and the wagon weight was 30 pounds. That said, those stayed constant, so that did not change. But like I said, as the height of the eyelet increased by 12 inches every time, the newtons of force, the horizontal newtons of force, did also increase. So our calculated values also showed that. What I am about to show you is all the calculated values. And as you can see in this one, I calculated it using sine to find the angle of theta, and then that was 11.6494. And then I used a horizontal force calculation to be able to find the horizontal force in the rope, which was 14.1109. And as we continue to go through, you'll see that angle kind of increase, and that's because the height of the eyelet is increasing. So like in this one, the angle was calculated to 16.1886, and then using that horizontal force calculation, it came out to 14.3915 newtons horizontally in that rope. This one, like I said, the angle is still increasing to 20.8406, and then that force ends up being 14.7873. And then lastly, which is our biggest angle, is 25.6385, and then that force that was calculated through that calculation is 15.3302 newtons. So our conclusion from this is that, in accordance with our hypothesis, both our experimental and our calculated newtons did increase with the height of the eyelet. However, the calculated were a little bit more close together and concentrated. The experimental were kind of all over the place, and I do have reasoning for that later on. However, from what we understand, yes, my assumption was correct. However, my experimental values were very off, which is understandable because there are a lot of uncontrolled forces that I haven't talked about yet. So a lot of my uncontrolled forces came from the car, so especially the inability to keep a consistent speed, especially with how uncontrollable the wagon was. It was pretty difficult. So we didn't get to stay at 5 miles per hour for very long. It was kind of a quick stint, which could have affected it. It could have been more of a tug force than a consistent speed. Secondly, the meter not being anchored down properly, or like I said at the bottom, improper usage of the meter, especially since it didn't have two hooks. It was kind of hard to situate in an area where the rope could pull on the hook but not be touched by anything else outside of it. The other ones, which are pretty standard, is the tires not being smooth. They were not smooth tires, and we were not on a smooth road, so that creates a lot of friction, and that could have very well played into our results. And then lastly, the road not being level. So the road not being level is a little bit of an outlier for me because I did test to see how level the road was. However, I could have been very wrong, or we could have changed spots and the road could have been uneven in different spots, creating more of a obstacle for the wagon to go through. Things that I would change the next time I did this would definitely be controlling the wagon a little bit more, maybe creating something myself that would go straighter, be able to hold the force gauge without any rigging issues. I would also probably get a force gauge with 2 hooks on it. That way I can hook a rope, and I wouldn't have to worry about strapping it on. And then also with the new cart that I would build for it, that cart has to be able to go 5 miles an hour and go straight without having issues and having to use the tug force like we had to do. But yeah, overall, I think I learned a lot doing this project, especially when it comes to real world examples of how we can see statics. I think that a lot of this is stuff that I could use in my day-to-day life. I do work at a manufacturing facility, and I see statics problems all the time now that I've been in this class. And that said, I think that this was just a great opportunity to learn something new and see how this stuff can be translated into everyday things, like when a car gets towed or when people go tubing or so on and so forth. But yeah, thank you for listening to my presentation. That is all.